know that we've ever met. We might have if I saw him.
Okay, good afternoon. It is 4 o'clock on July 9th. Neil? Hi.
All right, I think we're good.
Yeah, 4 o'clock on July 9th here. My name is Alyssa Calderhead, PTAC co-chair, and I am calling today's meeting of the Public Transit Advisory Committee to order. So we'll begin with some introductions of all committee members. Please say your name and which city, town, or board appointed you. And tonight, let's start with our virtual members. And then we can wind up with folks in the room.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Abdulia Odin. I'm the co-chair of the PTAC here on behalf of Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners.
Hey everybody, I'm Juan Contreras. I'm here on behalf of the MTC.
Great. And if we want to start around this side of the room.
Sure. Jonathan Wells, Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education.
Kevin Walsh, Town of Huntersville.
Chad Howell, CATS Chief Financial Officer.
Elizabeth Pursuti, Chief Administrative Officer for CATS.
Brent Cagle, interim CEO. CATS.
Alyssa Calderhead, mayoral appointee, co-chair.
Barry Green Jr., Mecklenburg County.
John Cock, Town of Davidson.
Jeff Parker, Town of Mint Hill.
Nick Gallo, Town of Pineville.
Okay.
All right, we're good.
I am Brett Baldeck. I am the Communications Manager.
Emily Kunze, CAT staff.
Stuart Pratt, City Attorney's Office.
Hey everyone, Catherine Creamer, Director of Marketing Communications, CATS.
Bruce Jones, Service Planning Manager with CATS.
Okay. Terrific. We have quorum. So I want to get into our topics for committee member forum at the end of our meeting. So does anybody have topics that we could, should, would need to address in the last 15 minutes tonight?
Hey, this is Tanya. Can you all hear me?
Hey, Tanya. Yep.
Hey, I'm interested in learning from Brent about the sales tax shortfall this year and how it could potentially, how planning for it for this year, and then how that could potentially affect us in future years as we're planning to implement the sales tax if it passes. So I'd like to discuss that.
Great. We'll save time for that at the last 15 of our meeting this afternoon. Okay, next order to address here is the approval of the June 11th, 2025 meeting summary. I hope everyone has had an opportunity to review, and I'd love to get a motion to approve the meeting summary.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting summary of June 11th.
Okay, motion by Nick Gallo to approve. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Okay, we have a second virtually by co-chair Abdulia Odin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I believe I heard all of our remote participants as well. Any nays? Okay, we have approval of the June 11th, 2025 meeting summary. At this point, we will open it up to public comment. I don't believe we have anyone.
We have no speakers, Chair.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll move on to item number 6 then, our MTC report. I believe I emailed this to all of you. My written report is also included in your meeting packet. At this point, we'll open it up for questions, concerns, comments around the summary report. And if there's any watching public, this report will be posted along with all of our other meeting materials by end of the week on the CATS website. Brett, will you? Yeah, thank you. Okay, with that, let's get into our agenda items tonight. We'll be covering the service and bus stop capital planning. We will hear from Jason Lawrence, Chief Planning Officer, as well as Patrick. And so looking forward to that, and y'all have the floor.
Okay, thank you. So today we'll talk about our service planning and scheduling team introductions, some of the service policies that govern our service planning work, basic service planning scheduling overview. We'll go into our bus stop at work that will lead to our better bus conversations, and a look ahead as we look to potentially implement a significant increase in service and bus stop improvements over the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide. Thank you. And as we stated earlier, we have Bruce Jones, our scheduling development manager, and Patrick Hoskins, our scheduling and operations planning manager, to go into some of the more finer details of service planning and scheduling. And so in your orientation, next slide, thank you. In our orientation, in your orientation as members of this committee, we share with you the policies that govern a lot of the work that we do here at CATS. Two of those that are near and dear to the work that we do in service planning is our travel markets and our transit service guidelines. And I want to go through some of those that help us frame how we define our services, but also look to how we prioritize our services. Next slide. And in travel markets, it provides policy guidance for markets that we serve, broken down to primary and secondary. Next slide. And then our primary travel markets, we do those in ranked order that you see there on the slides. You know, individuals that are currently within our system, those that do not have utilized private vehicles, existing customers, individuals that within our original 5 rapid transit corridors from the 2025 plan back in 1998, our adopted high frequency corridors, activity centers, and congested corridors. Next slide. And then we have secondary markets that are trips to and from our non-TOD developments and trips totally outside of Mecklenburg County and inter-county trips within the original 5 corridors. Next slide. And so what does that really mean? It really means how do we map those types of populations and how do we prioritize service? So when we look at mapping, we look at zero-car households, individuals with poverty, minority populations, and where are our job concentrations. Next slide. And so when we look at individuals without vehicles or existing customers, you can see there on the map, some of those greater concentrations are what we call the crescent, so areas east and west of the city. So routes like Route 7, Route 9, or some of those are primary travel corridors. Next slide. And then households of poverty also follows similar types of patterns. So Route 7, Route 9, Route 27, and in the area around closer to Charlotte are areas of higher poverty, which of course to us is a higher priority for us to serve with our local service and also our high frequency service. Next slide. And so existing customers, when we look at some of our minority populations, low income populations, they tend to all cluster in that same type of patterns throughout the city with clusters within areas around Huntersville and near their downtown area, Cornelius, as well as, in areas like Crestdale in the town of Matthews. And then employment and activity centers, we see that as a primary market for us when you think about some of the opportunities for serving Charlotte FC games, Panther games, Hornets games, other types of events within the city and throughout the county. Those become very important for us as we look to define our services as we think about Better Bus, but also how we think about our services today. Next slide. So with Jonathan.
Quick question on the maps there, the polygons you're showing, are those census tracts or block groups?
Yeah, they're census tracts, census block groups. Yeah, correct. So with that, we'll quickly go to Bruce to talk about some of the basics of service planning.
Thanks, Jason. So as Jason mentioned, Bruce Jones here, Manager of Service Planning with CATS. And so I wanted to give you all just an overview of what we do on the service planning team, just to explain some of the ins and outs of my role, and then also how we function with Patrick's team. So just to start, to kind of give you a definition as far as what service planning is. So I think the easiest way to define it is we plan the service. So where we go in terms of the accessing individuals to providing accessible connections for individuals, So determining the areas of mobility need. And so essentially we map out where individuals are trying to travel to and then how we can serve that with fixed route transit services. We have three primary types of service that we provide. We kind of classify them in different bunches, but primarily they're either classified as local all-day service. So for example, those are routes that operate typically 6 to 7 days a week throughout the day. We have our express service, which typically is more commuter-based. So it operates during the peak periods on weekdays, typically in the morning and then also in the evenings. We do have some midday service on some routes and then also some reverse commute. So typically instead of it coming into Uptown in the morning, it does the reverse. It goes from Uptown to the outer destination. In addition to that, we have our newest service that we just recently launched in February of this year with our micro transit service. So CATS Micro currently operates within the North Mettown, and we have a couple of slides that gives you a bit more information on that. But those are the three main service types that we provide. We also determine the level of service and frequency, so typically how often the bus comes, and then also the service span for the bus route, so how often it comes and then how late it runs in that regard. My team also determines bus stop placement, the level of amenities, so where shelters are located, how far bus stops are spaced along a route, depending on the route type and things of that sort. We also, to a greater extent, determine park and ride locations. So particularly with some of our express routes, we have a number of park and rides so individuals can drive their car, park their car, and then catch one of our commuter buses to come into town. We also develop new services. So anytime we develop an expansion of service where we want to maybe serve additional markets that we're not currently providing coverage to, my team also manages that. We have a larger plan to expand our CATS Micro service. So right now we have 1 zone. The goal is to expand that to 19 zones in total. And then also coordination of future bus networks with capital programs. Specifically the bus route integration component as we begin to build out some of those larger capital plans and other things in that regard. And so when we think about how service planning decisions are guided, so as Jason mentioned, the main foundation for how we determine service is we want to make sure that we're meeting those travel markets that we've identified. So making sure that we're serving those primary markets and then also our secondary markets. In addition to that, we have our transit service guidelines, which lays out how we provide service. So there's a lot of metrics that goes into service delivery. So one thing that we want to ensure is that we're measuring bus stop placement along routes, the level of frequency along routes, depending on route type, other things like on-time performance, load standards, and other things in that space. So that's all defined in our current service guidelines policy. In addition to that, we follow some of our adopted plans. So most recently, we just adopted our transit system plan, which defines how we plan to grow over the next 30 years. So with that, we have our rapid transit study, or rapid transit plan, excuse me, with the expansion of the red line, the blue line, gold line, and so on. But then a major component to that is also the Better Bus Plan. And so that's more of a short-term improvement over the next 5 years. And so there's a lot of individual improvements from microtransit to frequency expansion and other components to that as well. And we have some slides that goes into a little bit more detail on what all is in that plan. In addition to that, the customer provides the greatest level of feedback. So as we develop plans, we definitely want to put that before the public, put that before you all, just to gain input and additional feedback on that. Customer service typically collects what we call CSRs, or customer service reports, with information about maybe if we want to expand service or customers want later service, all things in that space. So we consider that with our service planning metrics as well. In addition to that, looking at how we can increase access to opportunity. And then also an important component is looking at how we can coordinate with local plans. So specifically some of the land use plans like we have with the 2030 plan with the city of Charlotte, excuse me, the 2040 plan with the city of Charlotte, station area plans for some of our future rapid transit programs, mobility studies such as the Huntersville mobility plan that you see there on the bottom, and then also some of our countywide plans as well. You go to the next one. And so how do we monitor the service? And so a big component of my role is not only planning the service, but then also monitoring the service to see how we're performing. And so we have a number of different programs that we use within our toolkit. Probably the biggest thing that my team utilizes is a program called Remix. And so with Remix, we're able to do what we call on-the-fly planning. And so it allows us to develop route concepts. We're able to do different things like analyze the demographics of where the route is serving. We can incorporate other data components into that as well. I think one of the probably coolest features recently that we've been integrating and utilizing is replica data. And essentially what that is we're able to look at cell phone usage to determine where specific individuals are traveling from at the neighborhood level. And so we can use that in Remix and use that for our scenario development as we begin to plan service with that.
Bruce, sorry to interrupt you. I think we have a question virtually from Tanya.
Hey, Bruce, I had a question. You said that you all, and I don't know if you're going to get into this when you talk about your the scheduling, but how are you all monitoring, I guess, or tracking when it comes to like the scheduling and the I don't know, is it execution of the microtransit when people are requesting and booking their microtransit trips, their rideshare trips, and then the actual times they get picked up and dropped off at their destination?
Yeah, so we monitor that. So we have a software called Spare that we utilize that has all that information in there. And so we utilize that to basically measure pickup times, average wait times, frequency, usage, all things in that space. Right now, we have a guaranteed service delivery of 30 minutes. As we continue to monitor that, we still fall well below that average wait time. So I think on average, we're about 15 minutes in terms of average wait time. We anticipate that will go up because of a number of factors. Specifically this week, we did phase out our Village Rider service, and then we're also offering fare-free service for the week just to help riders get more acclimated with the service. So we do anticipate that to go up slightly, but on our end, we'll continue to monitor that. But yeah, we do have data metrics with Spare that we utilize to keep an eye on that.
Got it. I asked the question just because I watched the most recent MTC meeting, and one of the public speakers was concerned about, he used the app for microtransit and it gave him a different time that kept shifting when he was actually picked up. So is that being also tracked in Spare from what is being shown on the app for your pickup time to what your actual pickup time is?
Yeah, so we actually just had a meeting about that this morning to kind of investigate that. I think what's happening in that situation is our app is estimating a pickup time. It's kind of similar to Lyft or Uber. So they give you an estimated window in terms of when the vehicle will arrive, but then once you're actually assigned a driver, it updates that. So sometimes those time differences may vary, but we are keeping track of that. Did you want to add something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Tanya. This is Elizabeth with CATS. We are also, as we deployed the software, we kind of had it opened up. We didn't have it dialed in on a lot of parameters so that we could, see what the optimization of the trips are. And, the goal is really to have a lot of, or have shared trips when possible. And so one of the things is so as the service has become more popular and better utilized, we're kind of seeing where we need to hone in and kind of put more parameters or change the dials on the software settings. And this is one case that we are looking at how we maybe change the settings in the software to limit the amount of kind of trip bouncing around or kind of opportunities for it to shift from one driver to another. And so we are looking to, we're meeting with the software vendor later this week, and then we'll be looking to put some new parameters in place on the software to help mitigate those instances. But we do know that is happening, and it's a frustration to customers, and that need to figure out ways to mitigate that.
Thank you, guys.
I have a quick follow-up, and Elizabeth, maybe you can elaborate, but outside of, recalibrating those parameters that y'all mentioned, are you using any other types of safety nets or programming or partnerships? After it reaches a certain number of requests via the app, it's overflowing into another potential service, maybe offloaded by Lyft, Uber, another rideshare?
Not at the moment. It's something that we've been considering, but we wanted to make sure that we were fully utilizing the resources that we had out on the street and guaranteeing before we kind of created an opportunity to add more services in the mix. So, and we haven't kind of met that peak level of service where that would be necessary.
But I will say, so Tanya, you had mentioned a speaker who spoke at the MTC. His name's Chris Wallace. He is an avid transit user, and we love his feedback. And what he was talking about, Elizabeth described, that is something that we are working on. That was really the whole point of the pilot, is to understand, the strengths and also where we can make things better. And Alyssa, you are correct. There are other transit agencies who do have sort of overflow trips that would flow out to a traditional TNC, a transportation network company, Uber, Lyft. And so while we haven't done that yet, that's another opportunity for us to think about that as we start to best gauge how to provide the service in the best way for the customers. I will also say Mr. Wallace mentioned bike racks on the vehicles. And while this wasn't asked here, it's a good news story, so I'm going to say it. Ms. Prezzuti and others have been diligently looking for and testing bike racks that will work with the vehicles. That sounds like, how hard could that be? The challenge was to find a bike rack that goes on the back of the vehicle that also allows the ADA accessible vehicles to be able to access, those customers to be able to access the vehicle. She has been successful in that, and they are now starting to test bike racks so that hopefully our microtransit fleet will be fully outfitted with bike racks, both in the one zone that we have and then in future zones as well.
And then the other piece of it is modifying the app so that when you request the trip, you also are requesting space for the bike. So that if you're not, so if there's multiple bikes on the vehicle and somebody needs to put another one on, that there's capacity for the bike and the person when they request it. So we're hoping to have all that put together and be able to deploy by July 21st.
And then will your app also then build in time for putting bikes on bike? Like, I'm not a pro put a bike on a bike rack person, but I know it takes me a minute to make sure my bike doesn't fly off. So will you all be factoring in the time element, I guess, with that too then?
Yeah, the software will account for that.
All right. Thanks, everyone. So just to get back into some of the tools that we utilize. So in addition to Remix, primarily on the scheduling side, we also have Hastis that we really use to help develop some of our schedules, operator shifts, mainly for the bus routes, but then also Gold Line and Blue Line. And then in addition to that, we generate what we call our GTFS feed, which I'll get to in a second. In addition to that, we use automatic passenger counters on board all of our vehicles to track ridership. And so we use that to measure, excuse me, specifically at the bus stop level, if there's additional improvements that we need to make based on ridership and other things in that space. But we also look at it to measure things like loads where passengers are getting on and off. We look at other things like maybe if there's an opportunity for us to expand service into a different area based on where individuals are boarding or alighting at, all things in that space. So definitely some useful data there. In addition to that, we use our Farebox, which has a lot of powerful data within it. We just need to access it more on our side. So we have things in addition to that, bus ridership data. We have bike usage data in there. We also have the ability to track wheelchair boardings. And so whenever the bus deploys a wheelchair ramp, that gets coded in the Farebox, and we're able to analyze that data. Fare revenue, transfers, and all things in that space. And then, as I mentioned, the GTFS feed, which is a general transit feed specification. So that is generated through Hastis. And essentially what that is it's the product that goes into software programs like our CATS Pass app, Google Maps, Apple Maps, et cetera. So it has all of our real-time information, scheduled information, and it really feeds and populates that data. We can go to the next one. So in addition to that, we do a lot of service monitoring on my end. So as I mentioned, we use the APC data and the ridership data specifically to monitor how we're performing from a ridership standpoint. So one of the things that we do on my team is we measure things like loads for trips. So we use programs like Tableau, which is connected to some of the APC data. We measure things like capacity on board vehicles just to make sure that we're not exceeding our load capacity. And if so, that helps drive the discussion about adding additional frequency or maybe extending service hours as well. We also have an internal work group that we call our Service Chains Task Force. And this is a group that we work with our bus operations team. And so essentially what this group does is we monitor the service. My team will present the service changes that we're planning for the year, and then we'll coordinate with that group to make sure that we have the resources to deliver the service. And we'll also monitor how we are performing in terms of service delivery. So one of the main components of that is making sure that we have enough operators and vehicles to not only operate our current service, but the future expansion as well. And then last, but certainly not least, customers. And so my team does a lot of customer engagement specific to service plans, some of our service changes. So recently with the Better Bus Initiative, we did a lot of engagement around that with this larger system plan update. We also did a lot of engagement around the service change with the launch of CATS Micro and the eventual phasing out of our Village Rider services as well. So customers, definitely a key component. You can see me in the middle there with one of our future generation, definitely engaging with them. But yeah, definitely a lot of opportunities for us to engage the public. Yes, sir.
Yes, Barry Green Jr., Mecklenburg County. My question was about the Farebox data. Is it also collecting things like, stroller usage or children, or like how many, like where your families could be on particular routes and like where there might be a capacity building opportunity?
So the operator codes specific types. There is for children, for instance, if it's fare free, there's a specific key that the operator can hit where we can code that. Strollers, do you know if it's captured? Yeah, I don't think we capture strollers, but there's a lot of different things. We rely heavily on the operator to hit the correct key in order to capture that data, but there are some metrics that we can use from that. Yeah, no problem. All right, we'll transition it to, sorry, go ahead.
not just strollers, but other personal transportation?
Bikes, I don't think scooters. And typically you're not able to bring the scooter on the vehicle. You can have like a personal, are you talking about like the Lime scooters or are you? Oh, the fold ups. I don't think we track that. No, we don't get specific to that regard.
You start tracking strollers, those other vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Yep. Yes, sir.
I'll follow up on that. Are there some automatic sensors that are tracking those kinds of things these days?
Yeah, so it's the APC data that we utilize. And so depending on how you interact with the system, we can tell if you're getting on or off the vehicle. And so we use that, it's on board our bus vehicles and then also our light rail vehicles, and we can use that to determine ridership. Yeah, it doesn't get that specific in terms, it's just mainly capturing movement. So as you, on and off the vehicles, yeah. All right, and we'll transition it to Patrick and he'll give you an overview of scheduling.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Okay, maybe I'll give it a try. So Bruce did a great job of giving you kind of an overview of our service planning function, and I'm going to give an overview of our scheduling function. So an easy way to think about the difference between the two and how they work together: service planning is determining where the bus is going to go, and scheduling is determining when the bus will get there. So just at a very kind of high level view of what we do in scheduling, once Bruce and his team have defined a route and where the route's going to go, in scheduling, we start building trips for that route. And when I say a trip, I mean kind of a one-way path or journey that's from the beginning of the route to the end of the route. And so we build out all the trips that are going to operate on a route based on the travel time that it takes to get from point A to point B along the route, as well as the frequencies and service spans that have been established. And then once we have all the trips built, it's figuring out how those trips get grouped into bus assignments. So which trips can a bus do efficiently and effectively? And then beyond that, it's packaging all those trips into work assignments for operators to choose from. And so I've got some numbers here that illustrate what that looks like for us on an average weekday. So we operate 3,000 one-way bus trips per weekday on 175 buses, using 255 bus operators. And then you see the numbers there for our rail service as well, just to give you some sense of scale of what we're scheduling for on a given weekday. And we're going to talk a little bit in a moment about our service change process, but just to point out too that whenever we have a service change, it also gives our bus operators a chance to select new work. So when they select one of these work assignments that we schedule, that's what they're choosing to do for the next 4 months. And then once we implement a new service change, that's another chance for our operators to change and do something different if they like.
Patrick, hold on just 1 second.
One point I want to make about this that I think is interesting, but also important to remember, that from the passenger side, don't necessarily think about it. When we talk about packaging trips for work, this is really very, very important into sort of the work experience for an operator, right? This makes a huge difference on satisfaction, on their satisfaction, because this is literally, when we say packaging the trips, this turns into their schedule. This is the work that they're doing. And so as we think about two things: one, having more frequency and standardization of frequencies across the network with the transit system plan, that allows us to better package trips because more routes are on 15-minute service and there's more standardization across all of it. So that helps with the work packaging, but it's also something that we work with Transit Management of Charlotte on to understand where those pain points are so that we can try to package work in a way that's advantageous or better for the operator as well as the passenger. But you know, when we think about packaging those trips, it's twofold. It's how does that impact the customers and how do we serve them? But there's also equal importance to how does that, play out for the operators as well.
Barry Green Jr., Mecklenburg County. Brent, to your point, does this mean if service is reduced that maybe you aren't seeing as long as shifts for operators? Like how, when you say it impacts their schedule overall, what type of impacts, I think, from their perspective?
So one thing that operators hate is what we call a split shift. And what that means is you come into work and you maybe work 4 hours and then you're off 2 hours or 4 hours, and then you work another 4 hours. That is a hard schedule. There's not that happens, right? In every bus operation, there are split shifts, but to the extent that you can minimize that and string together a package of work that doesn't create that, it's much better for the operator to do that. And so those are the kinds of things. The other thing that happens when you have routes, one route that's 15 minutes, but the rest of the routes are 25 minutes or 45 minutes or et cetera, it creates disconnects and sort of slack time in the schedule for the operators versus if all of the routes or the majority of the routes are consistently running on the same schedule and frequencies. And so those are some of the things that scheduling looks at internally. The public doesn't really see that, but we work together with Transit Management of Charlotte to help try to optimize that packaging for the operators.
Great. So another portion that I want to focus on with our scheduling is reliability, because reliability is a key focus for our area. And when we think about reliability, we really think about on-time performance as one of the main ways that we measure our service reliability. So I want to talk a little bit about what is on-time performance to CATS, because that definition varies across different transit agencies. So for CATS, we have an on-time performance goal of 85%. And by that, I mean we're 85% on time to our time points. And time points are key stops that we've identified along each route that from a scheduling standpoint really help the operator pace themselves along their trip. So you'll see our time points on our printed schedule. You'll see them on the website, and the operator has those that they're kind of marking their progress along the trip. So when we say on time as a definition, for each time point, buses that are arriving more than 5 minutes past the scheduled time to one of those time points is considered late. And buses departing more than a minute before the scheduled time at those time points are considered early. Everything else in between that window we consider on time. And so we are taking measurements and recordings at each time point for each trip on each route every day. And we're doing that through GPS technology that's on board each vehicle that recognizes when the bus arrives to a time point and what time it departs. And as you might imagine, that results in quite a bit of data that we collect that we're able to leverage and analyze to help understand kind of a full picture of our reliability. So we collect more than 10,000 time point recordings every day, which translates to over 4 million per year. And that gives us in scheduling a lot of data to work with to really understand our system. And so I've got a number of charts that you can look at in your packet that I'll just go through quickly just to give you a sense of the ways that we're looking at this data. This first one's just a high-level dashboard that we use to kind of see overall on-time performance and some basic trend data. From there, you can drill down to the route level by time of day, particular trips and time points within each trip to understand how those things are performing. Beyond that, we also look at it by day of week to see what differences exist there. This is just one example. Interestingly, Mondays are our best on-time performance day overall. We also look at it by time of day. So in this particular example on this route, it performs pretty well through most of the day, but we've really got an issue in the PM peak just for a couple of hours that needs to be addressed. And then beyond just on-time performance, we're also looking at schedule adherence. So in this example, most of these trips, it's not just whether or not it's on time, it's how on time is it, right? So most of these trips are arriving within 1 or 2 minutes of the schedule. But then we've got this one trip that's consistently 7 minutes late. So that gives us some indication that there's a particular issue that we need to investigate there. And then we also have runtime analysis, which I'm going to get into a little bit more in a minute, but really is just a way to understand the variability in those travel times along a trip and how best to schedule to that, where some parts of the day we have data points that are very close together and easy to schedule, and other parts of the day where it's much more varied and it makes it more challenging to put a reliable schedule together. So even with all this data, there are certain challenges that we face to providing reliable service. In addition to the variation in travel time that I mentioned, we have operational issues that come up day to day, doing detours, special events, that sort of thing. And then also just being in a growing city. I mean, Charlotte is constantly changing. I feel like anytime I go somewhere that I haven't been in a little while in a part of Charlotte, there's something new there. So trying to keep up with all of the changes and growth that we have in our city is a challenge, particularly over the past 5 years since coming out of COVID. We've seen a lot of changes in our travel patterns. And so with that, we really took that as an opportunity to say, let's do a comprehensive relook at our run times system-wide for all of our routes, which typically we do piecemeal as we can from one service change to the next. But the effort that we've undertaken this past year to do a comprehensive runtime analysis was really a chance for us to look at that wholesale across all of our routes at once, both for bus and rail, to really recalibrate our run times to our current conditions. And so that's been a really good effort that we've gone through over the past year, and we're wrapping up now, and we're starting to roll out some of those recommendations and changes over these next few months to our routes. Other tactics that we have, oh, go ahead.
Quick question, Alyssa Calderhead. So when we're talking about improving reliability, are these recommendations sort of occurring in a vacuum, or are you maybe looking at the intersection as a whole? I see you nodding your head, JL. So I would love to hear if you could elaborate on sort of what other, issues are being involved in this outside of maybe just, the bus itself or the train.
Yeah, so part of the effort that we did with the runtime analysis was not just from a data perspective of understanding, how long it's taking us, but also what some of the drivers are that are going into that. So everything from doing field observations on a variety of routes to doing operator interviews with both our bus and rail operators, and really trying to get an understanding of what the drivers are that are impacting our different travel time issues.
So one thing I'll say is when you look at the transit system plan and the recommendations for the transit system plan, there are certain routes where we've recommended signal prioritization or those kinds of things. All of those things are sort of strategies for improving on-time performance that aren't just buy more buses, right? Now, there are certain routes where we need more buses, right? Or one strategy is increasing the number of buses on the route. But there are multiple strategies that aren't just that, including signal prioritization or other technologies that feed into keeping the routes manageable and on time. The last thing I'll say about on-time performance is I think we all understand, even if we don't ride the bus every day, if we're driving and we're going somewhere at 5 o'clock, we may have to leave a little bit early, right? Because traffic's going to be bad. The other thing I'll say about the transit system plan and creating more frequencies, in our network today, if that bus only runs every 45 minutes, well, leaving early may mean instead of leaving an hour in advance, now you leave 2 hours in advance because there are only so many buses. So increasing frequency also helps the passenger to do what we all do really in our own lives, is you sort of account for that congestion when you're traveling at those times. But by not having the increased frequency today, we make it very difficult for passengers to be able to do that. And that has an impact on the operators, quite frankly, because that creates frustration with the passengers and that creates conflicts sometimes and those kinds of things. And it's really not an operator driven thing. OTP is not solely, in fact, usually is not majority driven by operator. It's the conditions around, it's congestion and those kinds of things.
Alyssa, Kevin Walsh, Huntersville. Just think about personal experiences on the bus. Like I take the 63X every day. You sit here in downtown waiting on Church Street. Most days there's an Uber driver, a delivery truck sitting in the curb lane. The bus has to get out of that lane, go around them. And so that's a delay. There's an area when they get off Handbright where there's an unprotected left turn. So the bus may sit through 2 or 3 cycles just to make that turn. So there's a lot of factors that go into delay. That's, yeah. So I just, from a personal experience, wanted to throw that out there.
Veteran Bird, Town of Matthews. And you may get to this in your presentation later, but one of my personal pet peeves, love the CATS app, but this little thing bugs me. And that is when a bus is out of service, it doesn't tell you this bus is out of service. It tells you the next arrival time is, and turns it red. And then it'll update that, stays red, until the next bus in the series arrives. So my pet peeve is, if I know when I arrive at the bus stop at 6:45 a.m. that my bus is out of service, then I can make other plans. It might be hop on the local bus. It might be Uber to work. It might be whatever. So if there's a way to include some of this micro data into the CATS app to say, your bus is not coming, it would be beneficial.
Yeah, something we can look at. Okay, and just to summarize a few other ways that we try to address reliability, we have an on-time performance task force that meets monthly, and this is kind of a cross-functional group within CATS between scheduling, planning, a lot of our operations folks, members of our bus operators that all meet together to really try to get in the weeds of understanding what the challenges are with on-time performance. It's been a really productive group and had a lot of good things come out of that. Other things I've got listed here, in addition to the data that I discussed, we look for ways to minimize the impacts of those missed trips when they do happen. How do we prevent that from having trickle-down effects to other trips on that same schedule, as well as listening to feedback from our customers and our operators. We can have all the data in the world, but if we don't have that real-life experience, those eyes and ears on the ground, that creates so much greater insight for us that that we find really valuable. And then also, as you mentioned with the CATS Pass app, if you have reliable data in your hands telling you when that bus is coming or whether it's coming or not, that can really build our customers' confidence in the reliability of our service.
Nichelle Dunlap Thompson, Mecklenburg County. I'm looking and it says this is also an effort to help recognize operators with outstanding OTP, providing support and coaching for operators to improve. So from a worker's perspective, my question is, how often is this data used to disciplinary operators? Or is this something that you utilize for that? And what is that occurrence? Because my concern is I don't necessarily would like for that to be a factor that would lead to a disciplinary function, because there are so many other factors that we may not see or have, privy to, which will cause somewhat of a delay. So
Sure.
How's that implemented?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I'd say is it's been primarily used as a tool to kind of celebrate operators that are doing well. And then on the flip side, with that bullet that I've got there, it's more so just an opportunity to really provide coaching and counseling. A lot of what we found, particularly with buses that run early, it may be just a training issue where an operator didn't realize, oh, I thought I was free to go at this point. I didn't realize I needed to hold back on my time because I was running early. And so we haven't really needed or seen a chance to use it as a disciplinary so much as just really making sure that everybody's on the same page about what the expectation is. Yes.
And maybe this goes to the comments that Brent made. As frequency increases, especially as you're getting into less than 10, or less than 15, 10-minute headways, is it safe to assume that on-time performance matters less for customers, for drivers, for CATS? I mean, if you know that.
No. For us, it will always matter, right? The standard is 85%. For a passenger, for a customer, maybe there is less stress, as you mentioned, thinking, now what am I going to do? Because the next bus is 15 minutes behind it, right? And so I do think it will ease customers' mind and give them better options. But for us, we'll always monitor OTP with a metric and a standard.
I'd also like to circle back to Nichelle's comment. The OTP data is definitely used to improve service and working with operators to make sure they're delivering the best service possible. But sometimes that data does lead us to other operational issues. An example from prior agency I worked with is an operator was always 10 minutes late. And as we dug into the data, they were going to the convenience store to get snacks, and off route. And so sometimes, which is definitely a disciplinary issue. And so sometimes that data leads to other things. So I wouldn't want it, I guess I just didn't want to leave the interpretation that it sometimes identifies other issues that lead to disciplinary issues.
And thank you for that clarification. I come in with the worker's perspective at the utmost importance. So I just would like to, and I know I may not be privy to it, but I just want us to be very mindful of how often that does lead to disciplinary actions, because this is supposed to be an implementation to improve service and not put folks at a situation where their employment is being compromised.
Great. Well, with that, we make all of our schedule changes when we do a service change. And so next, Bruce is going to walk us through briefly what the service change process looks like. So Bruce, I'll hand it back over to you.
And is this working yet? So we'll kind of skip ahead a few slides. We went over a lot of this information with you already. So I'll just jump to our timeline and load this. Sorry, we have so many animations on this. I should have. So to give you an understanding of our service change, so typically we change our services 3 times a year. That's consistent with best practices across other agencies. So we currently have an agreement with our bus operations team to change our services in February, June, and October of each year. And so basically what this allows us to do is make any adjustments to the routing, to the schedules, and then also operator shifts as well. So what I'll walk you through now is a typical timeline in terms of how we implement service changes. I'll say that these items, we were not held to this timeline. These are just goals that we try to meet. But typically for a process, this is working towards a June implementation. And so typically what we start 8 months prior to the change, we start the initial planning process where we identify what we want to include in the next change. So we'll take considerations from public feedback, from operations, also other things in terms of expansion and identifying what's feasible with that change. We'll then do our service proposals and we'll prepare a service analysis to determine the level of the change and what impact it will have. From there, through that process, we move forward with the public engagement. So we educate riders on what changes we're proposing and then allow opportunity for input throughout that process. With that, we then finalize our service proposals, take any recommendations that we got from public comments, roll that into the plans as it's feasible, and then we make our final recommendations for the service proposals and begin our timetable development. And then from there, we start the approval process of going to our governing board for approval with MTC buy-in for the service change. So we'll present that to the governing board, get that adopted. We'll then start the other internal processes in terms of updating our bus stops and routing in our databases. So with the HASTIS system, integrating that into the scheduling software, and then other relevant updates as well. We'll send our timetables, initial drafts to marketing so they can begin the development of the printed schedules that we have, and then also updating that information accordingly. In addition to that, we send our final public notification typically about 8 weeks before the change. So if we're making a major change where it's, to give you an example, this recent change where we were phasing out our Village Rider service for CATS Micro, we send it to MTC for approval in April, and then we send out public notification about a week or so after. So that gives us about 8 weeks or so before the implementation of the change. In addition to that, we finalize bus stop locations. I think you jumped ahead. Sorry, finalize bus stop locations and all the internal workings too that we send over to operations. So providing the operators with their work assignments, the left-right turn sheets, all things in that space. Additional communications, rider alerts to the public. You can jump ahead if this isn't. And then in addition to that, we begin our operator bid process. So Patrick develops the schedules and HASTIS, as I mentioned, he assigns shifts that the operators then bid on to select their work schedule for the next 3 months. And then we develop additional information to engage the public, or provide notice to the public, I should say. So tagging bus stops with information if it's a larger change that's impacting bus stops or a route change in that space. In addition to that, we provide training for operators in new routes. We post additional advertisement on our revenue vehicles with hanging rider alerts. We have kind of the interior cards if you ever look up on the light rail or the buses and you see those advertisements at top. We also use that to promote service. And then for the implementation, we start the service and then we begin on our end to do the analysis. So all the things that you saw in the previous slides, we start that process to evaluate the service. I will say too that typically June is our service change that we implement, but we did delay it this year to July 7th, this past Monday. The reason being is we were phasing out some of our Village Rider routes in North Mech, and so we just want to give the public a little bit more opportunity to get familiar with the service, understand the changes, and then also allow us to do engagement to educate riders. So this kind of details some of our recent service changes. So as I mentioned, we just launched our micro transit service in February of this year. And so what you see there on the map represents the current zone or boundary that we're operating. So it extends from North Lake Mall up to Huntersville, Cornelius, and Davidson. So this provides that on-demand service on weekdays from 6 to 7 p.m. and then on weekends from 7 to 7. An additional service change, as I mentioned, this past Monday, we actually moved forward with the phasing out of our Village Rider service and fully converted that over to the microtransit service. In addition to that, we phased out the 290, which was a Davidson shuttle that we operated as well. We also moved forward with eliminating an express route that we had, Route 47X, and that was mainly just due to declining ridership on that route. Since about 2019, we've noticed that ridership has just steadily declined to the point that we were only carrying about 1 or 2 passengers per trip. So we did do some engagement with those passengers, onboard survey, explained the discontinuation, and then identified some solutions. Essentially, they're going to drive to their location, but there are opportunities for us to continue to engage the greenhouse. We did just recently relaunch our van pool service. And so we've expressed, or we mentioned that to the greenhouse as well. So typically it's kind of like a carpool service for lack of,
Bruce,
kind of sum it up. Yeah.
Just for an explanation, because the CATS folks all know what you're saying, but I don't know if the others do. The 47X was called the Greenhouse Express. It was an express service that served basically, it went from JW, was it, where did it go from? Clay? Yeah, it went from Clay to Metrolina Greenhouse in Huntersville. So that's why we were engaging the greenhouse, because that was the Greenhouse Express.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes. Thank you. In addition to that, we improved service frequency on Route 24, which is Nations Ford Road in Southwest Charlotte. So it extends on Nations Ford Road between the Woodlawn Station and the Arrowwood Station. We improved service on that from 45 minutes on weekdays to 30 minutes. The next couple of changes until we get ready for the larger Better Bus implementation plan will be relatively small. So we'll be making things like minor schedule adjustments just to help improve reliability, kind of things in that space for the next foreseeable future. And then we'll continue to work towards the implementation of the Better Bus plan with the target, assuming that we're successful with the sales tax, of October 2026 to begin implementing that. So we'll skip now to bus stop improvement. And so this is a project that is near and dear to my heart because we always say that the bus stop is the front door to our agency. And so we definitely want to make that experience as they're accessing our services as pleasant as possible. And so one of the things that we really addressed is how can we improve the bus stop experience by offering additional amenities. So it's been a process that we initially started with our bus priority study, where we identified kind of a capital improvement strategy for bus stop improvements. What we initially did after that study is updated our service guidelines. And so I'll go into the next slide and show you more detail on that. I'll just kind of skim through these bullet points. So we developed a new strategy for how we roll out amenities. We have a new capital improvement plan for bus stops for how we improve bus stops in the foreseeable future. We have a new amenity contract, including new shelter products, solar lighting, and then also a public art component. And then now we're working on our implementation progress. So since 2022, we've made a number of improvements to bus stops, and I have more detail in a future slide. But then also we've been forming a lot of partnerships with different departments and then also other grant opportunities too to help get additional capital funding for bus stop improvements. And I want to highlight a couple of different projects that we're working on. So specifically with the corridors of opportunity and strategic investment areas. So we're partnering with other departments in the city of Charlotte to incorporate bus stop improvements along some of those select corridors as we begin to work and implement those capital projects. The SIA or SIA projects are happening relatively quickly. Right now, we're targeting the corridors of Arrowwood Road, a portion of Nations Ford Road, and then also Harrisburg Road for some bus stop improvements. And then as that program advances, we'll start to target additional corridors as well. Skip to this. Yes. Oh, yeah, perfect. We can go back. So I mentioned the Adopt a Stop initiative. So Emily has some handouts that she'll provide you. So if you're familiar with our Adopt a Street program that the city of Charlotte offers, this is a similar effort that we recently adopted. And so essentially it provides customers with the opportunity or community members with the opportunity to adopt a bus stop. And essentially you agree to look after that bus stop from a maintenance standpoint, trash collection, I should say, not actually repairing any damage. But we do also encourage individuals, if you notice things like signage is missing, or maybe there's a need for us to clean the shelter that's at the stop, to report that to us, and then we can get our facilities team out there to address it. But this is really a good opportunity for community members to have more buy-in in the bus stops. We are actively rolling this out to additional corridors throughout the system. Right now, we've implemented it on all of our corridors of opportunity. So Freedom Drive, Wilkinson Boulevard, Beatty's Ford Road, Central Avenue, just to name a few. And we're continuing to expand that. As of last check, I believe we have just under 30 bus stops in total that have been adopted. So still actively promoting the project. We do have an upcoming launch. I don't know if it's on that handout or not. Or relaunch, I should say, where we're advertising and promoting it to additional communities. Yes.
Nichelle Dunlap Thompson, Mecklenburg County. This is amazing. So I have a question. When it offers this particular program to residents, my question is there anywhere that you all are allowing them to, I guess, maybe become a little bit creative with the adopting a stop, i.e., in honor of someone that may have passed or what have me, like what would be an added incentive for residents alone to take up this particular project?
Yeah, so you do receive transit passes for adopting. You do have to, it's a certain period that you have to have ownership of that stop or have adopted that stop rather. But we do also offer a plaque that we install so you can dedicate it to someone special. It can be to a special organization. But yeah, there is an opportunity for you to get signage at that bus stop and have ownership in it. I will say for other things, we do encourage, we work closely with the city's placemaking program. And so if there's other things that you want to explore in terms of adding to the bus stop, we do encourage residents to work through that program. We've had some nice art integration into our bus stops. There was a recent installation in NODA where the shelter glass was transformed. So there's definitely opportunities in that space to get a little bit more creative. Yeah, no problem. Yes.
So in the Matthews Township Park and Ride, Veteranburg, Town of Matthews, a green trash can mysteriously appeared. And I thought, look at cats. This is great. We got an additional trash can. But that can is always full.
So we can we'll make sure that our facilities install that, but we can work, we work closely with the town of Matthews, so we can coordinate who's responsible for collecting. I don't know if it's our facilities or if we have an agreement with them, but we'll investigate.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
All right.
I'm sorry. Hey, this is Tanya Jameson. I had a question. Just kind of going back, when you talked about rolling out Better Bus in 2026, are you all considering rolling out the Better Bus plan like countywide at one time, or are you all planning to start with certain bus routes and increasing the frequency, or are you planning to start with microtransit? Like, how are you all planning to roll that out in 2026?
It will be phased out. So we're working on a prioritization plan now to identify how we want to start implementing service. We do have some slides that Jason will speak more to about that, but it will be a phased implementation approach over the next 5 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rob Hillman, Charlotte. I had a question for you about shelters and shelter rollouts. And specifically, there's a stop at Whittington and Statesville Avenue. Where are those? What's the prioritization, or how do we know what places are going to get, actual shelters, meaning with basically the cover to protect against sun and rain at the bus stop?
Yeah, so I'll go into detail about kind of our strategy for how we identify near-term improvements. One thing that I will note is that we have about 3,000 bus stops in our system, and so we are slowly but surely progressing. There's still a lot of capital investments that we need to make from an ADA standpoint or American with Disabilities Act standpoint, just to make sure that stops are accessible. But there's other factors that we need to consider too. We can definitely investigate. I'll circle back with Emily to get that exact location after this meeting, and we can give you an update of where that stands.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Can I add one more thing? When you talk about you all are going to sit down or you are beginning to strategize how you will do the phased in approach for rolling out the Better Bus Stop, this is Tanya Jameson again. Will that come before PTAC, before you all adopt this plan? Can that come before PTAC, before you all adopt this plan, so we can weigh in on what you all are thinking?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It'll be a large. Sorry.
So on the buses, so let me kind of break this down. When we think about Better Bus, there's the 15-minute frequencies for the top 15 routes. That's fairly easy to prioritize. It's the top 15 routes, and you work your way down the list. And those 15 routes span all over the county. But they're definitely concentrated where Mr. Lawrence talked about earlier. There's definitely a concentration of those in the more urban and heavily populated areas. So when we think about Better Bus in that 15 minutes, there will be some amount that gets rolled out on day one, right? It's just increasing frequencies. At some point, as we think about increased frequencies on the top 15 routes to 15 minutes, and then increased frequencies on the rest of the routes to 30 minutes, two things come into play. One is the need to purchase more buses, and two is hiring. And so the first thing that will happen is we'll start to make those 15-minute headway adjustments on those primary routes, the largest routes, working our way down. And at the same time, will be planning for ordering buses, starting hiring, so that we can seamlessly continue to roll that out. The second piece of Better Bus is microtransit, and that is really about contracting. And so we will start to look at how we prioritize the microtransit zones based on putting out the RFP documents, utilizing the expanding contractor that we already have. And that may take a little bit more time and a little bit more thinking on which zone goes next. But generally speaking, MTC 5, which we talked about earlier, still comes into play. And without going back to that slide and talking about all of those primary market priorities, what MTC really says is we strive to connect communities that need transit the most with activity centers and jobs. And activity centers is sort of transit speak for the places people need to go. It's the doctor, it's the grocery store, it's the schools, it's to work. And so that MTC policy will also drive those implementations as well. But certainly there's an opportunity to talk about the specific zones on microtransit and what we would view as the rollout of each of those 18 additional zones. The last piece of Better Bus is the shelter improvements. And as we contract for those, again, there'll be an opportunity, but there already is a master list of prioritizations and shelter prioritization and a policy on how we prioritize that. So as we get to bus stop improvements, again, happy to bring that back and talk about the list, but there are policies in place that help us to drive sort of that thinking around prioritization or the order of implementation. I hope that helped.
Yeah, did you all set the policies, or was that driven also by citizen input?
The policies were developed internally and then reviewed with community input and reviewed and approved by the MTC.
I think if we just go to the next slide, I think we updated MTC 06, which is the service guidelines, to include this more nuanced approach than just taking a straight ridership approach. And so, yes, it was community feedback that got rolled into an MTC adopted policy, correct?
Ms. Piscary? Thought I saw a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Anthony Hansford, Town of Cornelius. When we talk about shelters, what would that actually look like, for Cornelius, since we have the micro ride?
Yeah, so we've been working with the towns to prioritize our hub locations. So mainly at the park and rides and other key destinations. We still have shelter infrastructure there. I think as we continue to monitor origin destination trends with CATS Micro, that'll help drive that discussion a little bit further. But right now, the nature of the service, it's typically point to point, so it's getting individuals closer to their destinations.
Right.
But if we see, for instance, a lot of individuals are going to the rec center, Ada Jenkins Center, for instance, there's opportunity for us to make that a hub and then add additional infrastructure just to provide a more comfortable wait for people.
When do you think you have enough data to make that determination? Because I know it just started.
So
February.
we actually, in Davidson, we are moving forward with the Ada Jenkins, but as we continue to monitor, we have sufficient ridership data. So we've been working with the towns to identify locations for ADA improvements and shelters. So that's been an ongoing discussion. For Cornelius, we still have a number of shelters that are on Catawba. Is that the name of that?
Yes.
Yeah. We still have a number of shelters there. And so as we look at maybe retrofitting those shelters or replacing those shelters fully, we want to make sure that it still makes sense in those locations, or if we need to maybe look at alternatives. I think one of the primary challenges with micro is because it's a smaller vehicle. It's not a traditional bus, so it's not safe for them to stop on street. And so if we do look at infrastructure, we'll have to maybe look at putting it within a shopping center or offsite, if that makes sense.
All right.
Alyssa Calderhead, co-chair. Thank you so much, Bruce. We're going to have to wrap it up and move on to our committee forum here. I want to hand the mic back to Tanya we talked about the sales tax shortfall. So Tanya, I don't know if you want to, set the table for that and reintroduce us to the issue that you brought up at the beginning of this meet.
Yeah, sure. So at the MTC meeting this, I guess it was a week or so ago, Brent mentioned that there was a sales tax shortfall this year that they have already adjusted the budget for. So in anticipation of what they're seeing. So I'm curious to find out for this year, how did you all decide what you're going to not fund or do to adjust the budget in anticipation of the sales tax shortfall of $3 million? And then moving forward, how do you all make those decisions and determinations how do you all decide what's not going to happen as a result of a sales tax shortfall?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me try to answer this in the simplest way I possibly can, but I want to preface this with I spent a lot of years in city budget and finance, and so I like this. I don't want to go budget nerd on anybody, but if I do, tell me to stop. So when we developed the budget, so what we said last month, so a couple things. Our fiscal year ends June 30th. So happy New Year, everyone. We're in the new year here. And what we said at the last month's MTC meeting, and sales tax revenue is generally speaking 3 months behind in reporting. And so we now know that we know what our expenses are for last fiscal year. And based on where we are last month with the sales tax reporting, the sales tax reporting is indicating that we will close the year slightly lower than we budgeted the year on sales tax revenues, i.e. we'll be short from the budget by somewhere between, let's call it $1 and $3 million, we think, based on the actual reports we have. Now, the caveat to that is we developed the budget about 6 months before the fiscal year. So on day one, the revenue budget is already 6 months out of date. And that sounds maybe alarming, but it's not, because what we then do is we update we do a mid-year revision. And that's exactly what we did last year. As we saw the sales tax revenues coming in slightly lower than we anticipated, in the mid-year, we updated the revenue projections and we updated the expense projections. So the short answer to what actions did we take because of that, just like revenues may come in a little bit different than you thought, so do expenses. And so we did not have to specifically eliminate programs or make budget cuts because we were able to accommodate that in our revenue and our expense estimates that we conducted about 6 months ago, right? What would happen if there was a significant variance in revenues? Then, again, we would adjust in the mid-year, and it could trigger what we would call a mid-year reduction or a recommendation for a mid-year reduction. And that would then lead to us coming to PTAC and ultimately the MTC and talking about the projected revenue shortfall and what we would need to do to adjust for that. Now, we always want to avoid those kinds of events, but they do happen. COVID is a perfect example where it was unforeseen and revenues went to zero immediately. And so when those kinds of things, or next to zero, not zero, but next to zero, when those kinds of things happen, you definitely have to make adjustments in your spending. Usually what happens is you taper out those spending reductions over a longer period. And the way you do that is we have cash reserves that that allow us to, so that we don't have to say, look, we're 6 months in and there's a major revenue shortfall. So now tomorrow we have to cut 10% of whatever. That's right. That may be the ultimate result, but you would do that over a tapered, over an extended period to be able to, one, monitor, is this going to be an extended reduction in revenue? And two, to allow people to start to plan for it, us included. And so if this one was not significant enough that we couldn't adjust for it internally in the mid-year expenses, but in the event that it were, that is what would happen. We would come forward to PTAC, to MTC. There would be public engagement because it would likely result in service reductions. So all of those things would happen, and we would, in effect, extend those reductions by using our cash reserve so that we could better work those reductions into the system and talk about that with PTAC, MTC, and the community.
Got it. So are you all doing scenario planning then? I don't know how often we have the sales tax revenue shortfalls like we did this year, even though it's minor. So then are you all doing scenario planning for moving forward if the sales tax passes and there are reductions, and how that impacts projected expenditures that you all were planning to do, whether or not it's giving the money to the towns, and whether or not, how money would be spent in Mecklenburg County? Like, how are you all then preparing for the future if the sales tax does pass?
So the answer is the same, whether it does or doesn't. When we look at revenue projections, especially when you start to look at a longer time horizon, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, you basically use average annual growth rates of the prior 10, 15 years. You use historic AAGs, and that becomes sort of your baseline. What you don't try to do is sort of predict catastrophic events because they're unpredictable, right? 10 years ago, no one could have predicted COVID and its impact on transit or the rest of the world. And so that's how you plan for that. And that allows you to use it. So COVID and its impacts are clearly part of the AAG because they impacted each year. But that's, in short, how you do that over a longer period, 5, 10, 15 years. And that's true in today. And, even without a new sales tax, that's how you would manage your revenue projections. And then each year, as you get better data, you start to align your more solid revenue projections with your expenses, if that makes sense, right? Each year, as you get closer and closer to, the future is less far out, you get better data and you start to refine that and make those adjustments. I think that answered the question. But
yeah, it does. I appreciate it. My last thought would be that no, you can't predict catastrophic, but it seems that we are in a time where we're having catastrophic events every few years now between COVID and recessions, et cetera. So I don't see any harm in also just planning for catastrophic because we seem to be on a 5-year cycle or so of catastrophic stuff. So, but thank you for answering the questions.
Understood.
Question I had actually was related to the topic was what would constitute a significant reduction in revenues? If I think you said it's 1 to 3 million. If 1 to 3 million was not, what would be a?
Yeah, so that's a hard one for me to, this was within a few percent of the totals. That's a hard one for me to answer. It's almost like, you know it when you see it. I don't know if I can define it, but you know it when you see it. Here's, I guess, the other thing about this one, and this all plays in. we were seeing weakness in the revenue collections early, but then we also started to see them rise and level out. And so it sort of depends. I can't give you an exact amount. It also depends on what you think the future holds. If we had started to see weakness and then we started to believe that this was the beginning of a sustained downward trend, our reaction might have been different in that this was a few months of weakness. It seems to have leveled out. And then the forecasts say it should start to grow on a normal rate again at about 4% is what we assume, somewhere around 4% based on those average annual growth rates. And this one we thought, and we work with the city's economist as well, we thought this one was not a sustained downturn. It was just a few months of weakness.
But if I remember correctly, don't you conservatively project revenue?
We do.
In the event that.
Yes. That's the other reason. So we conservatively project revenue. Everyone does that, right? You're always better off to have underestimated revenue than to overestimated revenue. So our revenue projections are by nature conservative, and that helps protect us when we see these kinds of slight variances or short-term variances.
Yeah, I just would like to chime in really for the committee to not get too wrapped up on that small of a shortfall on the bigger picture. Because really they can come up with policy responses and look for low-hanging fruit in terms of expenses. I don't think this is a doomsday scenario. Of course, you got cash in the bank to make up for the shortfall in the short run. And then as they begin to look at and forecast what's happening throughout the remainder of the year, they have a better picture on how to really project out things. But this is not a catastrophic moment with this adjustment. They just have to do a policy response probably in the future.
I appreciate your perspective.
I can't speak for Tanya, but I guess I think at least it seems like the line of questioning was about what is the process for prioritizing adjustments to expenditures or budgets in the face of shortfalls, from shortfalls in income based on historical projections, because that's sort of a general question. Something that you did say that I did want to get a little clarity. Did your expenses also taper off, like in line with your revenue?
Well, so our revenue projections are always conservative. We never assume that next year is going to be the biggest year, in the last 10 years on revenues. That's never how we do it. On the expense side, what we also find is, generally speaking, people tend to budget more than they actually spend. And that's natural, right? We want people to say, I'm going to get 100 things done and it's going to cost this much. And it's still okay if they only get 99 done. But we do see that the natural inclination is that actual spending tends to be below budgeted spending. And that's not necessarily someone didn't do their job. It's just the nature of the budget and how it works. I guess let me try to answer the first question.
So is it like expenditures are aggressive and revenues are conservative, I guess?
I wouldn't say expenditures are aggressive, but I would say our staff takes it to heart and they are aggressive about all of the things that they will get done in a year, even if every one of those doesn't. And so, instead of 12 months, it may take 18 months. But from a fiscal year perspective, is 12 months, right? And so is what I'm trying to say on the expense side, that the norm is that usually budgeted expenses are a little bit greater than actual expenses. The short answer is, I think that to your bigger question is, what does CATS do and how does CATS have engagement with the PTAC and MTC and community if we need to make reductions? The answer is we would bring that information as soon as we know it, as soon as we've determined that we would recommend a true reduction. We would bring that to PTAC, MTC, put that out into the community to implement those recommendations over whatever the time span it is that we're recommending. We did not do this time because we did not need to recommend specific cost reductions in any single area or line or service, if that makes sense.
Because they weren't significant, basically, is what I think.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. I got it. I don't know if that answers Tanya's question, but it certainly answers mine.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I appreciate you breaking it down for us.
Okay, with that, last order of business here is, in lieu of our August meeting, Emily Coonsey and CAT staff will be reaching out to the committee for more information on setting up tours for a supplemental tour, if you will, at various CATS facilities. So stay tuned for more information to come on that from the CATS team. And with no more business, can I please get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Okay, motion passed by Nichelle Dunlop Thompson, seconded by Barry Green Jr. Any nays? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. We will see you in September, the 10th, I believe, here at Charmet Government Center. Thank you all.